What I'm about to propose here is not going to happen. I just want to say that right up front on this edition of Mic Drops. I thought I would come up here and do a little bit of fantasy booking and start talking about how we can possibly revamp or improve WWE's pay-per-view schedule and current format. I am recording this right after WWE Stomping Grounds 2019, a pay-per-view that was horribly built. It was right in the middle of a Saudi Arabia show. It was filled with rematches. It was one of the least interesting pay-per-view builds in recent memory. Fans have been shitting on it for weeks. Ticket sales were horrible. And the show turned out to be very good. And I had a feeling that it would be. I even mentioned that before the show, that even though the build and the storyline and the angles and the creative for this completely sucks, the wrestlers are very talented and they're likely to come through and give us a good night of wrestling. And they did, really showing us that the true problem in WWE has nothing at all to do with the talent and has everything to do with the creative process. WWE is experiencing some of their lowest numbers of all time. And we just got done with a pay-per-view that, number one, had a stupid name, Stomping Grounds. It's right up there with Great Balls of Fire and a few others as the worst pay-per-view names of all time. On top of that, it wasn't built very well, and literally no fans whatsoever were interested in this show. Many people skipped it, many people didn't watch it, and it just sparked absolutely no excitement or enthusiasm in the fans at all. And it got me thinking about WWE's pay-per-view system and how they do things and why they come up with these stupid shows. And this one was already moved around and jumbled up to begin with. This pay-per-view, I think, was originally supposed to be Backlash, taking place right here in San Diego, and got bumped because of the Saudi Arabia show. Money in the Bank got moved up to May and also got separated from TakeOver, which I thought sucked. Backlash turned into a house show here in San Diego, and the pay-per-view moved to Washington and became Stomping Grounds. And what a ridiculous name for a pay-per-view. And on top of that, if you are going to name a pay-per-view something this dumb, at least put it in a city that used to be one of WWE's actual stomping grounds, like New York, like Allentown, Pennsylvania, like Baltimore, Maryland. A city like that is just rich in WWE history, but fucking Tacoma, Washington? Give me a break. And the fact that people are actually paid real money to brainstorm and come up with these pay-per-view names absolutely blows my mind. So I thought we would have a little fun here today and talk about how we can improve upon WWE's ridiculous pay-per-view system. And I've got these pay-per-views narrowed down to 10. And like I said right in the beginning, I am not saying WWE is going to do this. I know that a lot of what I'm going to propose here is not really practical, but I think it would make for a much better product. So hear me out. Let me know what you think about my ideas here, and let me know what you would change about my pay-per-view format. Now, like I said, I think it needs to be reduced. I think we are long past the days of needing 12 pay-per-views. The only reason we got to 12 to begin with was because of the Monday Night Wars. WCW upped their pay-per-views, then WWE upped theirs. That's where the In Your Houses came from. And they used to be $20, and they used to be 2 hours long. And they would come in between the big 5 pay-per-views: Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, King of the Ring, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series. I actually liked that format. But as we got going and WCW started upping their pay-per-views to 12 and making their pay-per-views 3 hours with shows like Uncensored and Sold Out and Road Wild and World War IIIs and all this shit, and then WWE started renaming their In Your Houses actual names and upping them to 3 hours, and things just got out of control. And then when you had the brand extension after the buyout, I think they even went more than 12, because then you had each brand having its own pay-per-view. We might have been somewhere near 20 pay-per-views a year at one point back in the day. So this shit's getting ridiculous. You don't really need that anymore. And I think you can build so many better storylines, and you can allow your audience to get invested more in these angles if you have more time to come up with shit. Because if you're just having to write a brand new pay-per-view the day after finishing another one, you're constantly on the move. And I think it's just burning out all of the writers there. They just cannot keep up with the fast pace of WWE and this insane touring schedule. So here's what I propose as far as a WWE pay-per-view schedule. Now, number one, like I said, I'm going to reduce it from 12 pay-per-views to 10. And I'm even going to go through another scenario at the end here that if we absolutely have to have 12 pay-per-views a year, I'll fill in which ones we're going to do. So the first thing I would do is slightly reduce it down to 10. The second thing I would do is I would make every pay-per-view happen at the same time every year. I think it would be so much more fun and so much easier to keep track of. Now, during the Attitude Era, they shuffled things around a little bit too. I actually attended the first two Unforgivens live in 1998 and 1999, but they were both in different months. In 98, it was in April. In 99, it was in September. Judgment Day took place in a couple of different months as well. I think in 98, it was in October, and then in other years, it was in May. So I think that I would prefer, anyway, these pay-per-views to have the same names in the same positions every year and take place at the same time. Is that so much to ask? And one thing I'm doing right off the bat as well with my new pay-per-view format and idea here is I'm eliminating every single gimmick pay-per-view. It is one of my biggest pet peeves in WWE. I absolutely detest pay-per-views like TLC, Hell in the Cell, Elimination Chamber, and Extreme Rules. Those pay-per-views piss me off, especially pay-per-views like Hell in the Cell and shit, because I feel like a Hell in the Cell match should be used when an angle or a feud or a storyline calls for it, not just because it happens to be on your pay-per-view schedule coming up in October. And I'm not saying you can't have Hell in the Cell matches, Elimination Chamber matches, TLC matches, or Extreme Rules matches. You can have all of those matches during any pay-per-view whenever a particular storyline or angle calls for it. How fucking hard is that to do? Why can't you have a Hell in the Cell at SummerSlam, at WrestleMania? We actually did as recently as 2016. But I think you eliminate these stupid gimmick pay-per-views, and if you want to have a TLC match, have one. If you want to have an Elimination Chamber match, have one. Just put them at any random pay-per-view that you damn well choose, whenever one is needed. I think that would really take the handcuffs off of you creatively if you didn't have to worry about these stupid-ass pay-per-views coming up on the horizon. So gone right away are all of the gimmick pay-per-views. Gone. Fuck them. And returning are a few of our old favorites, including a couple of ones from WCW. So here's what I would do. Let's start right off in January. And of course, we got to keep January the way it is, the Royal Rumble. That's a great way to kick off the year. It's one of my favorite pay-per-views of the year. It really helps set the table for WrestleMania. 2 number 1 contenders come out of that show. And in most cases, we see title changes on that show as well. So Royal Rumble is awesome. Keep it right there in January. February was one that I kind of racked my brain around. I used to like the old No Way Out pay-per-views. And I remember when they started doing the Fastlane pay-per-views, I thought it was a dumb name. I put it right up there with Stomping Grounds and Great Balls of Fire. I remember thinking at first that Fastlane was lame. But you know what? We're going to keep Fastlane. Yep, I'm sorry. You know, No Way Out was fun, but we're not going to do No Way Out. And you can't do St. Valentine's Day Massacre because that only can work if Sunday happens to be on the 14th. So I think we're going to stick with Fastlane because Royal Rumble is the road to WrestleMania, and then Fastlane is the fast lane to WrestleMania. So I'm going to do something crazy here, and I'm going to cop out, and I'm going to let WWE keep that lame Fastlane pay-per-view. I think it works in the February position, and I'm fine with it. March is a month I would skip altogether. I do not like having 2 pay-per-views in between the Royal Rumble and WrestleMania. I think that's way too many. And actually, honestly, if it was up to me, I would put no pay-per-views in between Royal Rumble and WrestleMania, but I know that's not really realistic. So if we have to do a pay-per-view after January, that's fine. And they don't necessarily have to fall in the exact months. We just have to do 10 pay-per-views a year. It doesn't really matter which weeks these fall in. But, you know, let's say we do Fastlane in late February, right after the Royal Rumble, setting up the final stage for WrestleMania. Most of your matches should start coming together by that point. And then, instead of having to worry about another stupid pay-per-view in March like the Elimination Chamber, you've got all of this time to build your matches on TV, on Raw and SmackDown for your big show. It'll give you a good solid, 6 weeks to build everything in storyline on television. That's what you need. So Royal Rumble starts off the year, then Fastlane, then WrestleMania. Then in late April or early May, whatever, you do Backlash. We're bringing back Backlash. Backlash should have never gone away. I think it's a great pay-per-view name, and I think the only spot that it belongs in is after WrestleMania. We follow that up, of course, likely in June with Money in the Bank. We're going to keep Money in the Bank as the only gimmick pay-per-view because I actually like it. It's kind of like the Royal Rumble. You have 2 matches to determine number 1 contenders. I'm cool with it. I think Money in the Bank does not overdo it if we're getting rid of the Chamber and Hell in the Cell and all those other ones. So Money in the Bank, I've grown to love. Money in the Bank, I don't want to go anywhere. And, you know, the big June pay-per-view, the Big 5 pay-per-view back in the day used to be King of the Ring. I'd be open to bringing back the King of the Ring. I'd be perfectly fine with that, but I think Money in the Bank still works. You can't make everything old school. You have to make something a little bit more modern. That's why I'm keeping pay-per-views like Fastlane and Money in the Bank here in June. July was another one. July I considered skipping altogether, because you really don't need a pay-per-view there. WWE has had all sorts of pay-per-view names in July. They've had Fully Loaded, they've had Vengeance, they've had Invasion, they've had Battleground, and they've also had the Great American Bash. And that's what I would bring back. I would resurrect the Great American Bash. I think it might be fun for competition for WWE to take the idea of the father of their competition over in All Elite Wrestling with Cody Rhodes. And of course, Dustin is over there too. WWE has used the pay-per-view name before. I would like to have some throwbacks to WCW in WWE's pay-per-view schedule. I think the Great American Bash is a fantastic pay-per-view name. It comes in July, right around 4th of July, which is when the USA celebrates its independence, and it's a perfect time of the year for that. So I would go with Great American Bash in July and just have a fun night of wrestling with some, red, white, and blue themed shit like they used to do. Remember that great pay-per-view poster back in the day with Tori Wilson in the red, white, and blue bikini or whatever? Do one of those. Great American Bash, I think, would be fun for July. Then, of course, you roll into August, which gives us SummerSlam, which doesn't need to change anything about it at all. SummerSlam will stay the way it is, and SummerSlam will stay the second biggest pay-per-view of the year. September was another one I thought a little bit about. I was like, well, should we resurrect Unforgiven or No Mercy or something like that? But I'm going to stick with Night of Champions. Either Night of Champions or Clash of Champions, but we're already doing a couple of WCW throwbacks here, so we're going to do Night of Champions. It's a pay-per-view that's taken place in September, several years in WWE, especially in recent history, so I'd be open to keeping that in the month of September. Night of Champions, all championship matches, I'd be fine with that. Moving on to October, I thought about maybe doing No Mercy, because No Mercy took place in October back in the day, but you know what? Let's do another WCW throwback, and let's do Halloween Havoc in October. Every year, make a different pay-per-view set instead of that lame, glorified Raw and SmackDown set that you use for every single pay-per-view these days. Make something fun. Make it some sort of a Halloween-themed type of show. You don't need to go overboard. There doesn't need to be food fights. Not every single roster member and announcer and referee needs to be in costume. You just need to have a Halloween-themed show. Have fucking pumpkins out on the set or something. Much like the Great American Bash, I think Halloween Havoc can be there just to be a really fun night of wrestling. What's the harm in that? The month of November, of course, does not need to change either. We have Survivor Series there, and I do not want to change a thing about that show, and I don't want to see it go anywhere. And that leaves December, and if you've been counting along with me, you realize that I've already reached 10 pay-per-views. So I think we're going to take the month of December off for pay-per-views. No pay-per-view in the month of December. Now, in recent years, I've actually pitched the idea of off-seasons in WWE, and one of the times that I thought would be perfect for an off-season was December. And I pitched that idea time and time again. Oh, WWE should give the talent the entire month of December off. They can recharge their batteries. They can nurse nagging injuries. WWE can do other shit like run recap shows and stuff like that. But I think we all understand that that's really not practical, and WWE would never in a million years do that. So I'm going to meet them halfway on this one. First thing we're going to do is we're not going to have a pay-per-view in December. No pay-per-view. And the next thing we're going to do is after the 15th, well, assuming there's 4 Raws, or 4 weeks of TV in December. Let's just assume that. Depending on how the calendar falls, maybe some years there might be 5. But if there's 4 weeks of TV, like Mondays and Tuesdays in December, I say the first 2 weeks of TV, you do like normal, and then the final 2 weeks after the 15th of December, everybody goes home. The entire roster goes home, and they don't return to TV until the first Monday of the new year. That's when everybody is back. It gives the talent 2 weeks off, all of them, to spend time with their families. Many of them have young children. It would be great for them to be able to experience the holidays with them for 2 weeks, and it would still even give them a little bit of time to recharge, to rest, and get ready to go balls to the wall into WrestleMania season. And you're not sacrificing too much. You're only sacrificing 2 weeks of live events. It's not a big deal. And in the place of those TV shows, you do a couple of things. Year in review shows. You run recap shows. You do some sort of special events chronicling the year, or just some sort of a holiday themed show on Raw and SmackDown in the second to the last week of the year. And then in the final week of TV in December, right around New Year's Eve, you run the Slammy Awards. You fly everybody into a location, and you do it like you did back in the 80s and the 90s. No more combining the Slammy Awards with Monday Night Raw. You dress everybody up in a fucking tuxedo and make the women wear evening gowns, and you rent out a banquet hall and you do the Slammies exactly like you did in 86 and 87 and 96 and 97. I think that would be a lot of fun. Those shows were fun back then, and it also gives you something to do. It gives you something to put on TV, has the talent there to cut some promos and do some things, and they don't have to work. You know, you're going to have one or two brawls and some people are going to get into it at the Slammies. But aside from that, it's a relaxing night for the talent and their families. Because if you remember back in the 90s, Bret Hart had Stu and Helen and his wife and his kids. You know, all the boys had their families there. It was just a lot of fun. And I think that would be a great thing to do in the month of December. So instead of giving all the talent a month off, fine, that's not practical, I get it. But can we give them 2 weeks off? Just fucking 2 weeks. Run recap shows, do a Slammy Awards special event, do a tribute to the Troop show, do something like that you can tape and play during those final 2 weeks of the year, during the holiday time, when a lot of people are really busy anyway and don't have time to keep up with new, fresh storylines in WWE. Everybody's traveling and doing holiday shit. And you just give the talent a chance to chill. And then whatever Monday, whatever date the first Monday of the year falls on, whether it be the first, second, third, or fourth, or whatever, that's when the talent returns to TV and they are right back on the road, resuming the schedule as normal in the beginning of the year. And on top of that, you still have to think about the network specials. If you notice, one pay-per-view I could have put in December would have been Starrcade. WWE's been running like a house show network special for Starrcade the last couple of years, and I would love to put Starrcade in the December spot, but I opted not to. I say keep Starrcade the way it is. Just make it a network special and just keep doing it that way. No big deal. We brought back the Bash and Halloween Havoc. Starrcade was known as WCW's WrestleMania, and I think December is one of the worst months for pay-per-views, at least in modern times. So I think that would, not really do the name of Starrcade any favors if it's put in a December slot that doesn't perform very well based on recent numbers. And you're also going to have a couple of Saudi Arabia shows. We can't forget about those, and maybe even some other network specials as well. So if you have 10 pay-per-views and you have all of the NXT takeovers attached to the Big Five, like always, during the Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, Money in the Bank, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series, takeovers during all of those, you have probably 3 network specials if you do 2 Saudi shows and a Starrcade. Maybe you do one more. And I think that would be plenty. That would be more than enough pay-per-views. That would be more than enough shows. And it would just relieve a little bit of the pressure. Instead of doing 12 pay-per-views, you do 10. You allow yourself a little bit more time to develop storylines and get creative with them instead of having just to run right into another pay-per-view before you can even catch your breath. I think this would spread things out a little bit better and make everything a lot easier on everybody, the fans, the writers, and the wrestlers alike. Now, if you absolutely have to do 12 pay-per-views, then you can bring back Judgment Day and put it in that May slot. And you can also bring back Armageddon and stick it in the December slot. This sounds very sexual. But there's plenty of other pay-per-view names we could use, like Vengeance, like Judgment Day, like Armageddon, like Starrcade. There are some other shows out there, some show names that I did like, but these are the ones I chose to go with here. I thought it was a nice mix of old school, modern times, and some WCW throwbacks. It reduced the pay-per-view number. It spaces them out better. It keeps them a lot more organized, and I think it'll be a lot easier for the fans to follow along with this shit in their heads if they have a little bit of consistency with the pay-per-view schedule. So there you go. That's what I propose. Let me know what you agreed with and what you disagreed with in the comments below. If you have a completely different pay-per-view schedule idea, let me know every month, January through December, which pay-per-views you would do and what you would call them. Thank you very much for listening. I'll catch you real soon for another mic drop in the near future. Be good. Peace.